Welcome to Future Epoch, where we learn more about our world. In the year 2000, Nokia was the most valuable company in Europe. Its phones were in the pockets of more than 400 million people. It controlled over 30% of the entire global mobile phone market, and at its peak, its market capitalization approached $300 billion. Then, in the space of 7 years, it was gone. Not gone like a fire. Gone like a slow collapse that everyone could see coming, except, apparently, the people with the power to stop it. This is the story of how Nokia lost the smartphone revolution it helped create, and what that failure reveals about power, fear, and the hidden dangers of being at the top. Nokia is a Finnish company, founded in 1865, not as a technology firm, but as a wood pulp mill. Over the following century, it expanded into rubber goods, cables, and consumer electronics before pivoting decisively to telecommunications in the 1990s. That pivot made it one of the great corporate transformations in modern history. By the late 1990s, Nokia had essentially built the architecture of the mobile communications world. Its handsets defined what a mobile phone looked like, felt like, and did. The brand was synonymous with reliability, simplicity, and global reach. At its height, Nokia employed more than 100,000 people and contributed significantly to Finland's national GDP. Some economists estimated that in certain years, Nokia alone accounted for more than a third of the entire Finnish stock market. The company was not simply successful. It was a national institution. Nokia's mobile dominance was built on hardware, network infrastructure, and an operating system called Symbian. Symbian was practical, efficient, and well-suited to the phones of its era. Nokia led a consortium of manufacturers that backed the platform, and for years it worked well enough that the company had little reason to question it. The first serious tremor came in the early 2000s, when Nokia's own research teams began exploring what a touchscreen smartphone might look like. Internal projects produced working prototypes of devices that in some ways resembled what Apple would later launch. The hardware capability existed. The conceptual thinking existed. But the products did not come. Internally, there was concern that a large touchscreen device would cannibalize Nokia's existing product lines. The technical risks of scaling touchscreen production were considered significant. And the business case, at a time when Nokia was already enormously profitable selling the phones it already made, was difficult to argue with any real urgency. The iPhone launched on the 9th of January 2007. Steve Jobs described it as a phone, an internet communicator, and a widescreen iPod in a single device. The reaction was global and immediate. Within a year, Google launched Android, making its software platform available to any manufacturer willing to use it. The smartphone ecosystem was no longer an Apple novelty. It was a platform war, and Nokia was fighting it with Symbian, an operating system that had not been designed for touchscreens, app stores, or the internet-first experience that consumers were rapidly coming to expect. The conventional explanation for Nokia's failure is technical. Symbian was too old. The touchscreen transition was missed. The app ecosystem never developed. These things are all true. But researchers studying Nokia's internal culture have identified something more unsettling beneath the technical failure. A study conducted by INSEAD Business School drew on interviews with Nokia engineers, middle managers, and senior executives. What it found was a culture structured around fear, specifically, the fear of delivering bad news upward through the organization. Nokia's leadership had cultivated an environment in which performance metrics were paramount, and being seen to fall short carried real professional risk. This created an incentive structure that encouraged middle managers to filter information as it moved up the hierarchy. When engineers and product teams understood that Symbian was failing, when internal assessments showed that Nokia was losing ground, those assessments were softened, delayed, or reframed before reaching the executive level. Senior leadership, according to accounts gathered in the study, were operating on information that had been optimized to avoid alarm rather than optimized for accuracy. This is a specific and dangerous kind of corporate failure. It is not the failure of strategy in isolation. It is the failure of an organization to tell itself the truth. In 2010, Nokia appointed Stephen Elop as its chief executive. Elop was a Canadian executive who had come from Microsoft, and he was the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's history. In February 2011, Elop circulated an internal memo that became one of the most widely discussed corporate documents of the decade. He described Nokia as standing on a burning platform, a company surrounded by fire with no clear path to safety. He acknowledged that Nokia's software ecosystem was years behind the competition and that the company had been outmaneuvered from multiple directions simultaneously. The memo was leaked almost immediately and made global headlines. What followed was a strategic decision that divided opinion sharply. Nokia announced it would abandon Symbian and its own Linux-based mobile system called MeeGo, and would instead build its smartphone line exclusively around Microsoft's Windows Phone platform. MeeGo had produced a device called the N9. Released in limited markets in 2011, the N9 received strong reviews from critics who felt it demonstrated that Nokia still had the capability to produce compelling hardware and thoughtful software. But by the time it reached consumers, the strategic decision had already been made. MeeGo was discontinued, and the N9 became a footnote. The Windows Phone partnership produced several years of Lumia handsets. Some were well-built, well-reviewed pieces of hardware. But the Windows Phone platform struggled to attract the app developers, and consumer enthusiasm needed to compete meaningfully with iOS and Android, both of which had by then accumulated ecosystems that were years ahead. Market share continued to fall. Nokia's devices division bled losses year after year. In September 2013, Microsoft announced it would acquire Nokia's devices and services division for approximately €5.4 billion, equivalent to roughly $7.2 billion. The deal closed in April 2014. The acquisition was widely interpreted as a final acknowledgement that the Nokia phone business could not survive independently. It was also, for many who had watched Nokia's rise, a deeply symbolic moment. A company that had once defined the mobile era was being absorbed at a fraction of its former worth. Microsoft's ownership of the Nokia handset business lasted less than 2 years. In 2015, the company wrote down approximately $7.6 billion in losses related to the acquisition, announced the layoff of more than 7,000 former Nokia employees, and began dismantling the handset operations it had just purchased. The Nokia brand was eventually licensed to HMD Global, a Finnish company formed in 2016. HMD produces Android smartphones under the Nokia name today. They are modest, competitively priced devices. The name persists. The company that built it is gone. Nokia's fall is regularly taught in business schools, and the lessons drawn from it depend heavily on what the teacher wants to emphasize. The obvious lesson concerns platforms and ecosystems. Nokia built great hardware, but failed to build the software ecosystem that would have made its devices indispensable. By the time the company understood what the iPhone had actually launched, it was competing for a platform loyalty that consumers had already begun to form elsewhere, and that loyalty proved extraordinarily difficult to shift. But the deeper lesson is about organizational culture. A company that cannot honestly assess its own situation cannot respond to it. If the people who understand a problem cannot communicate that problem clearly to the people with the power to act on it, the result is a kind of institutional blindness that no amount of talent or market position can protect against. Nokia had engineers who understood the scale of the challenge. It had research teams who had explored the future the industry was moving toward. The information existed. The technical capability existed. What failed was the system for translating that knowledge into decisions at the right time. Nokia's story is sometimes told as a cautionary tale about disruption, about what happens when a new platform arrives and incumbents move too slowly. That framing is accurate, but incomplete. The harder truth is that the people inside Nokia were not oblivious. Many of them saw exactly what was happening. The problem was not that the organization lacked vision. The problem was that the organization could not hear itself. Every industry faces a moment when what it has built reaches the edge of what it can sustain. The companies that survive those moments are usually the ones with cultures where uncomfortable information moves freely, where the people closest to the problem are empowered to say what they see, and where the distance between reality and the boardroom is as small as possible. The question Nokia's story leaves behind is not really about smartphones at all. It is about what happens inside any organization when the cost of delivering bad news becomes higher than the cost of silence. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.